Silverstone Edge is just over a year old, and our vision is to combine private sector and government experience in transformative programs. So we use the disciplines of large-scale program management, that's very much my background, combine that with the behavioural sciences, design thinking, to accelerate transformation on large and sometimes small business projects. We're a new business. So we work closely with our clients, and we use industry-leading visualisation techniques and creative frameworks. Our job is to transfer our experience, our knowledge and capability and work with our clients to achieve the outcomes that they're seeking.
So a good company understands that both its short-term profitability and its long-term sustainability understands that the return it offers to investors depend on a capacity to continually adapt or risk demise. And that, I hope, is what public services can learn from the private sector. But please also understand this. Competition for success and for survival isn't just at the heart of the private sector. Many of you will know that organisations in the third sector, the community sector, although they can come together, although they espouse cooperation, although they can create great social movements, it is an open secret that they are competing, because they have to compete for the philanthropic dollar. You can't have a wonderful mission unless you have the financial sustainability to deliver it. So the not-for-profit sector, just as much as the private sector, lives in that world of competition, of succeed or fail. And I think it helps to explain the level of innovation, for example, that has gone on in the not-for-profit sector over the last 10 or 15 years. Well, it seems to me that their underlying adaptive culture, what to me lies at the heart of adaptive government, has four key foundations. This is what they are. 1, flexibility. Public services have a problem. There's a problem in the way in which governments traditionally deliver programs. There's a problem in the manner in which the contracts that are written so often constrain the outsourced providers, prescribing in amazing and stupid detail how they should operate. There is a tendency for regulatory interventions, which may be well-intentioned, to impose an unreasonable burden of red tape that undermines entrepreneurship and imposes as many costs on the community as it results in benefits. There is the fact that the appropriate need for public accountability often focuses on processes, often focuses on the allocation of input resources, often focuses on compliance rather than on performance. Now, all of these, I think, are characteristic aspects of public administration, and they tend to create inflexibility. So it's important that public servants, working, I hope, with those in the sector, develop programs that meet the ambitions of government, make sure that there is appropriate design and agreement on outcomes, being able to measure those outcomes, and then the best thing public servants can do is get out of the way and let the contracted organisations, because that's how services are generally delivered now, let them get on. Let them have different ways of delivering that services. So, 1, flexibility. 2, for adaptive government, you need, yes, wait for it, you need to experiment. The normal method of business responding to new competitive pressures is, in general, not to try and transform their operations on a large scale at once. You know, whether I'm looking at my experience in VIDA or AMP or an old aged care, what we tend to do through the board is to identify our appetite for risk, and then within that framework carefully project manage a range of demonstrations to test our assumptions, to trial newer approaches. Sometimes you can do that organically. Sometimes, of course, what companies do is by acquiring other new competitors who are doing innovative things. But you tend to trial because you want to see what actually works. Now, I'm going to tell you that governments don't do that. Oh, you say you're a nincompoop. Look at the Commonwealth Government. Look at the APS. Look at the number of pilots that exist. Here's an open secret. Those pilots aren't pilots at all. When a public servant talks about a pilot, it means that they have had a wonderful idea, supported by the minister, that has founded on the rocks of finance and treasury intransigence. There hasn't been sufficient money, and therefore you get a small amount of money, and you say, because we've got a small amount of money, we call it a pilot. Oughts are not a pilot in the sense the community sector or the private sector would use a pilot. Now, as I say, the public sector is full of those pilots. It doesn't work because they don't influence the core. So many of those interesting things that I've talked about have been pilots. They exist at the edge. I'll visit a particular 1 or 2 Centrelink offices and they're doing real interesting experimental things. But my frustration is they are never seen able, even if successful, to then influence. So we've got to, in the public sector, reinvent the pilot, trial a variety of ways to deliver outcomes sought, perhaps by doing it directly through public servants, perhaps through contracting out to entrepreneurial providers. We need to have the capacity, adapt, be willing to fail. Think ministers, doesn't sound too good. But be willing to fail, and if you fail, fail quickly, fail early, adapt. But if successful, to roll out, to scale up. So that third thing we need, I think, is facilitation. Because, let me be clear, I think, and I approve, that public servants will remain at the heart of good public administration. They will retain situational authority. They will have access to processes of government, to ministers, that others, however strong their advocacy organisation, however strong their evidence, will not. They will remain at that heart between governments and the public. They will provide robust advice, oversight implementation, write legislation, regulate, act as stewards and be publicly accountable for the use of public resources. But they need to think how to use that situational positioning. Because it seems to me that, like good corporate executives or community leaders, they need to recognise and have imprinted upon them the fact that many innovative ideas, often based in practice and first-hand experience, lie outside the public sector. Public administration needs to be evidence-informed, but more importantly, it needs to be creatively reimagined, in part by looking outside the public sector environment. Public servants need to make it easier to have people enter the public service and work on particular projects that engage them, and then leave again. What do we know is going on in the private sector? Well, increasingly people talk about the Hollywood means, the Hollywood model of working. We need a Hollywood model of public service. What that means, if you think about the Hollywood model, is a great deal of experts, actors, producers, directors, cameramen, gaffers, etc., are brought together. They work on a particular project which excites them. The project is finished, and they disperse again to come together in various forms. A lot of the work that public servants do lends itself to that. Here is a particular project, a particular challenge that we want to make. Bring people who are interested in that. They don't give a rat's about the public service. In fact, they don't want to be a public servant. But that particular project, particularly if it is presented as working in the national interest, does attract people. Bring them in, let them work, let them go. And in the same time, give public servants more flexibility to go and work in the private and the community sector. Empower our contracted providers to help co-design new approaches. Let citizens, through the extraordinary potential of digital democracy, have greater capacity to influence programs. So public servants, in my view, are important, but what they now need is a different sort of leadership. This is not the leadership of control. This is the leadership of facilitation, bringing in ideas from within and without the public service in order to create more creative and innovative approaches. Fourth thing you need for adaptive government is agility. There is a need to accept that whilst things like institutional capacity and leadership capability and performance management are very important to public services, that there needs to be something more profound, and that is a culture of continuous learning. Whole of government approaches need not only to break down the inherent tendency of horizontal bureaucratic silos to slow change and to direct improvement along rather well-established lines. Equally important, agility requires public services to find ways to mitigate the dampening impact of vertical hierarchies. Now, hierarchies are important. I am sure ministers are delighted that by the time they have got a briefing note, it has gone from an ASO 6 and been seen by an executive level 2 who's then had it checked by an assistant secretary and then gone through the deputy secretary. I am sure it is at the margin to improve things at the cost of 3 weeks' time, but they do need to see there are costs to that. We need to see there are costs to hierarchy in the way they tend to dampen down creativity and imagination. It does give integrity, it does improve quality, it does help to ensure that we have one of the least corrupt public services anywhere in the world. All that's good. But we need to also realise what are the costs of hierarchy and the way it can crush creativity. We need agility. And that requires a culture of discussion and debate and challenge, which actively encourages new ways of thinking, a capacity to change organisational structures, to allow that thinking to be demonstrated and trialled, and of course, if successful, help to transform the core of public service. So, in 8 words, what is adaptive government? Be flexible, be experimental, be facilitative, be agile. This ethos, it seems to me, can underpin public services that bear testimony to the virtues of tight, loose management. Tight, loose management. Tight in terms of meeting high standards of public accountability. Tight in terms of promoting value for money and measuring the returns on public investment. But loose. Loose in allowing and encouraging the promotion of new approaches to deliver the ambitions of elected government. Adaptive government sometimes means starting small. The best way to discover the value of adaptive government is to do it. Pay on outcomes. Embrace experimentation. Start early, and if things go wrong, fail quickly. Collaborate widely and learn as you go, including from the experience of outsiders. The real barrier is cultural inertia. So it's public servants. Public servants driven by an impulse to deliver greater public value rather than by the necessity to maintain or increase market share, that need to be able to change the way they do things. It's public servants themselves who will now need to lead change. It's public servants who are going to have to persuade the governments that they serve to provide the authorising environment to allow them to do what I know that they can do.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. That was an amazing talk, amazing discussion. I think though the ideas have got a lot of resonance. I saw a lot of my colleagues in the IT industry and in government. You know, I think the time has come actually for this sort of change to be happening in that intersection between public and private. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Again, I thank Peter for his generosity in donating his fee this morning to the Chancellor's Scholarship Fund, and in a small way our contribution to that. So thank you all very much, and thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you.